Good morning, people. Titus here for part 12 of our Flashbang series, and in this video, we'll be tackling the UV unwrapping process for our low poly model, and in Marmoset, we'll be baking texture maps that include the AO, or ambient occlusion, the normal object, the material ID, and curvature maps. Once we have these maps baked with light and shadow data from our high poly model, we can then apply it to our low poly model, but only after each part of the model is UV unwrapped. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. Alright, so let me go ahead and bring back our low poly setup here. The first thing we'll probably want to do before we get too far into it is our models. We probably weren't actually keeping up on this, but they have non-uniform scale. So we'll want to actually go through, select everything here, and we can make sure it's selected, and then just press Control A and apply all transforms. And then you can see it's zeroed out. Now, if we do that on our high poly, you might notice an error message. So if we select everything, we'll expand it out. You can try Control A, apply all transforms. Yeah, it's because we have some parts of the model have text, which are not converted. So you'll actually have to do this in sections. So we can select a few pieces there, Control A. And then we'll actually just have to go through a lot of the objects. And apply them manually. Control A, all transforms. Object 7, Control A, all transforms. And then that'll be our handle. Oh wait, no, that's our handle. Our handle's already good. And our tank is already good, so. All right, so it looks like our scale is good. So let's go ahead and hide our high poly. We'll go back into the low poly. The other thing that is worth mentioning, when we started off, or when you start any model project, you probably want to set your, kind of like your scale on the size you're actually building. I believe if you come over, let's see, where is it? Yeah, right here, under scene properties, there's a unit section, and you can set, your preferred, whether you're doing metrics or if you prefer imperial. It basically means, like if you go into like front view here, each one of these little squares is equal to 10 centimeters. If I zoom out, each one of the bigger squares is 1 meter. So if you're used to like feet and inches, you can switch it to imperial, and then you can see that each one of these little squares is 1 foot. So our flashbang that we've been modeling is actually what, 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, like 17, almost 18 feet tall. So when you're modeling, you probably want to keep that in mind, and you want to keep it within its bounds. Because if you have to give this to like a programmer, they're gonna have to bring in an engine, and then they're gonna have to redo scaling, so that's extra work. In this case, we're actually the game programmer and the artist, so kind of doesn't matter too much, but it's something to keep in mind, in the future when you start doing some of this stuff, maybe more on the regular. So I'm going to leave it as it is, and when I bring it in engine, I'll scale it there, but you can also scale it in, as you're working as well. Either way, it doesn't matter. But all right, moving on to the UV unwrap. I am going to, my screencast keys unfortunately are not going to work very well here, so I will do my best to call out my key movements that I'm doing. And actually, before I do that, I'm going to switch to my Blender file. And you don't have to follow along for this, but I am going to delete my texture so you guys can start fresh with me. There we go. And then I'll switch that back to the view layer and UV editing. There we go. So this is probably what you guys are looking at right now. And let me bring this down. Okay, so the first thing we'll want to do is we'll want to do new, and then we'll want to give it a name. Let's call it maybe Flashbang UV, and we'll call it Blender. If you're doing a texture map, I recommend doing either 2K or 4K. You can go up to 8K, it's just rather large. I think 4K is probably overkill. So you can set the width and the height to 4096 pixels. A nice shortcut to do is you can actually click in and drag. Oops, I can do it right, like that. And then you can actually add an asterisk and multiply it, and it will actually do the math for you as well. So I'm not going to do an 8K, so I'm going to try dividing by 2, and then bring it back to a 4K texture. Once you have that set, you can choose, color grid, UV grid, blank, doesn't really matter. We're going to be doing the baking and marmoset anyways, but I always like color grid, just because it's more visually, I can see kind of like the stretching and stuff. So we get something like that. The other thing you'll want to do is if you scroll over this drop down, make sure you have display stretch checked, and that will basically show the UV textures as dark blue or light blue, or like a really like yellow, or and basically you want or at least what we're going to be going for is making most of the mesh dark blue. So as you move up in color, it's basically more stretching, which means when we actually texture a marmoset, it's going to look a little weird. So dark blue is what we're going to be aiming for, and this is just a way to visually see that. All right, and then basically all we have to do is we'll create a new color piece here. Let's start with the tank. This tank will kind of show you what we're doing. So for this, I'm going to do new. I'm going to call it underscore UV. And I'm going to press Shift A. Also, if you don't have this viewport, you can move to see you have the cursor like this, and then you can just like drag a new view in here, or you can switch one of your current views over to the node graph editor. So either way. And then we'll do Shift A, we'll add a texture, and then we'll do image texture. And then we can hook the color into the base color. And then in the drop down, if we hit that little part, it'll actually see the UV texture map we just created. So we actually type that there. And then now it applies our texture map, so we can kind of see what we're doing. All right, so I'll tab into edit mode, and you can see this particular part of the model is displayed here. What you can do most of the time is just press A, select all, right click, or I'm sorry, not right click, U, and then you'll see your UV unwrapping options. There's a smart UV project. You can click on that and kind of leave the defaults and just click OK. And for most of the time, it'll do a very good job. You see there's some stretching on some of the objects here, but that is a quick way to do it. But I'll show you how to manually do it as well. Basically what we're trying to do is, you can imagine basically cutting line segments out so we can basically peel it off into a flat plane, so we can apply a texture on it or paint it later. So what I'm going to do is I generally like to come from a part of the model that's not going to be seen, which is probably right about here. I'm going to try and make a cut that'll be hidden by the handle so I can isolate it. So I'm looking probably around here if possible. Which it looks like I don't have anything there. I could create one, but I'll just use this line going down here, which isn't bad. So we got to be in edit mode. I'm going to select line select here. I'm going to hold Control and then just basically make an entire cut here, and then I can right click and do mark scene. Now if I press A, U, and I do just regular unwrap, you can see the unwrap in progress. So that's currently what we have dealing with. So obviously it's not great. There's a lot of stretching, it's really bad. But we also have an inside face. So what we can do is select here, and then we can bring it down here, control click. And when you control click, it'll actually follow the line. So you can then right click, mark seam. Now this too will not actually, it's still going to look like a mess. It's not going to do anything, which you can see there. And that's because these two pieces are still connected by these inner ring faces here. So what you'd have to do is you'd have to select each ring and then UV unwrap them. So you can see why this process can be pretty tedious. Fortunately, the angle is pretty steep on the rings, so we can just simply go to select and do select sharp edges. And it's going to select all the sharp edges, which happens to be all the rings, so we're lucky. And then you can right click, mark a seam, U, and this is going to get us a little bit closer, but not quite. And you can see we have a much cleaner UV unwrap. Our rings have a bit of stretching though. To fix the stretching, unfortunately there's no real easy way. You're going to have to get up close on the model, and I like to usually make the cut somewhere like you wouldn't normally see, so I like the top, and I'll just hold shift and I'll just make these little selections at the top of each ring like so, and then I'll just rotate around my model holding shift so I don't lose my previous selection, just like so. And this is why this process is not liked by many. This is just very tedious. I don't know if anybody actually likes this. Maybe they do. And then we can right click, mark seam, we'll back out, press A, select all, U, unwrap, and then we got a much better unwrap here. Now there is a add-on out there. I think it's paid. It might be free. I think it's called like UV squares or something, where it'll snap these to be perfectly straight, and that'll actually allow you to line them up better and get I guess better use out of your texture map. So if you're really quenched on like space, where you're maybe designing for a mobile game and just space is king, you know, you might want to look into that add-on. That you can get a lot more out of it. But yeah, so we got this part is pretty much done. I'm happy with that, so I'll tab out, and now we can move on to the next part. So we'll just select another model, and I like to give it a UV texture so we can see what we're doing. And we'll / isolate, tab into edit mode. You can select all, and if you press U, we can do smart UV project, see how it looks. You can see it's not bad, but we got really bad stretching here. If I was going to UV unwrap it, I would probably do an Alt and select that ring, and then Shift Alt, select that ring, and mark that as seams, select all, unwrap, and then I would probably just select something like that, mark a seam, select all, and there you go. You got a much better result. It looks pretty good. You could cut it more, but I don't think that's bad, so we'll tab out, come out of /, and then we'll do the top cap, / to isolate. You can tab in edit mode, it's fine. And then I'm gonna select my, I wonder why that's not at the top, _UV, tab over, and then I'm gonna do the same thing. So I think Alt, Shift Alt, mark seam, and then I think I did one of the front faces there, mark seam, unwrap it. There's a little bit of stretching there, so I can see why. So I'd probably select this ring, and this ring's gonna do it as well. So I'll mark a seam there, press A to select all, U, select unwrap, and still stretched, which is a little surprising, but I guess you can make a cut there. Well, let's actually make sure that works. So let's mark a seam. Does that actually make, oh yeah, that makes a big difference. Okay, so we'll just do that for this one here. Right click, mark a seam, press A, U, unwrap. Looks good. All right, so tab out of edit mode. Let's do that center column piece, the fuse charge. We will select our UV map, / tab in edit mode. If we select everything and try the smart UV project, see how it does. That does pretty good. You got a little bit of stretching there. Actually, got a lot of stretching there. You got some weird bits here, so you can see it, you know, it does an okay job sometimes, but if you wanted to manually do it, I would probably go with the ring selection. So I would do Alt, click on that one, Shift Alt, click that guy, and then this one goes, actually, let's try it without it. Let's see how it looks. And then I would do Shift Alt this guy, and then I would do this one and this one, and then Shift Alt that one. And then mark a seam. I'd also want to cut up the middle, but let's just see. We'll select all with A, unwrap. And yeah, we need to make a cut in the middle. So let's go Alt select this one. And I am going to deselect that one and this one because we haven't made any cuts there. So mark seam that way, select all, UV unwrap, and we still have a bit of stretching, can't tell. So what we can do is, if you don't know where it is, just press deselect everything, press C for circle select, and you can kind of select the bits that are stretching. And then you can, you can see it's right there, but if you do view frame selected, it'll kind of zoom in on the parts you have selected. I missed that inside ring there. So mark seam there, A, unwrap, much better. Slight stretching there, but that's not awful. Actually, where even is this piece? That one of these guys here. Hang on. Oh, I think it's just that ring there. What you could probably do is maybe come around this side and then make a cut as well. And then I'm just going to deselect these two, mark seam, press A, U, unwrap, and there you go. It's a little bit better. So the reason I'm showing you the long process on doing this is just because even if you do like add-ons or any type of shortcuts or use the Smart UV project, it'll work most of the time, but you'll probably run into a few cases where it'll fail you. And if you know how to do it, you can troubleshoot it when it comes up. So you can still use it, but it's good knowing how to do the process and understanding why it's happening. So you can troubleshoot issues when you run into them. All right, so let's do the ring. Hit the drop down, UV, tab into edit. So this one we forgot to re-topologize, so we kind of messed up a little bit here. So I'm going to go into solid view real quick. I'll do face selection. I'll select one of the faces and just press L over it, so it'll highlight it. Then X, delete the face. Same thing over here. Press L, selects the whole face. X, delete faces. Go back into line select. Hold Alt, click that one. Hold Shift Alt, click that one. Then press F to fill, like that. Right click, mark a seam, press C, go back to material preview. I am going to press Alt and select a back face. I'm going to mark a seam, and with that, we're going to be pretty good. Now the issue you might run into is this is very curved. There's a lot of stretching as well. What I would do in this particular case, because it's so curved, it's going to get in the way of other meshes. So I would actually cut this up into pieces. So we can do that. I'm going to hold Alt. I'm going to select this ring just right as it gets to that curve, not quite. Because mainly your stretching comes from your changes in harsh angles. So if you go from if you go at a 90-degree turn and you include that in the actual mesh cut, you're gonna get a lot of stretching there. So just minor turns are okay, but harsh turns are not. So right there, then Shift Alt, I'll select this one, and then Shift Alt here, Shift Alt there. I'll come around the back, Shift Alt on this guy and that one. And Shift Alt here and here. There and there. Then we can right click, mark a seam, press A, U, and unwrap. And now you can see it takes up a lot of space. There's still minor stretching, it's not as much, but we could then scale this down, you know, which is what we're gonna do when we actually pack the islands, and it's a little bit more manageable versus what we had before, which was that huge bend, which is, you know, there's not a whole lot you can do with it. But otherwise, I'm okay with that. So I will come out of /, tab out of edit mode. We'll select this ring, add a UV map to it, / to isolate. And I think we messed up on this one too. We forgot to retopologize. And yeah, we did. Let's just see what the UV project looks like. So use smart UV project. It does a pretty good job. There's some stretching. Let's see if we can do a better job though, which I think we can because we can retopologize a bit. So I'm going to come into solid view, face select the face, then press L, highlights it, X, delete faces. Click over here, press L, X, delete faces. Then click align segment, then Alt, Shift Alt, press F. We got it filled, right click, mark a seam. Looking good. Then we can just Alt, click a back face or a back line, right click, mark seam. Come back to material preview with Z. And then I'm going to press A to select all, U, and I'm going to try my unwrap. And if you notice, this is ideal. If you can do this every time, you're probably, you know, golden, because this, you could see, you'll see it later when I get to the rest of the mesh, but this takes up very little texture space and there's very little stretching, so that is kind of like the ideal unwrapping that you're looking for. But your models are not always going to work out that way. Sometimes the shapes are very odd, but you can cut them quite a bit, so you know you can do a lot when you take the time. So a lot of this is how much time you put into it as well. All right, so let's come out there. We'll select one of the pins, give it our UV map, tab into edit, isolate. We can see what the smart UV project looks like, see if it's any good. Not bad. It's a little bit of stretching, but yeah, I mean, I don't think we're gonna get it much better, but I'll show you how I would do it. Based on this shape, I would probably Alt select right up the middle, like that, mark a seam, A, U, unwrap, and then I bet we're gonna have stretching at the tips. Yep, really bad stretching. Can hold Alt, and it's kind of hard to see. Let's do Z, wireframe, and we'll do Shift Alt, and we'll just build out, oops, this selection here with Shift Alt, oops, and clicking around. All right, right click, mark a seam. X-ray is kind of messing me up, so I'm going back. Actually, let me try going back solid. All right, so Alt, then Shift Alt, and just build with Shift Alt the selection. Yeah, it's a little better. And mark seam, and then I'll go back to material preview, press A, U, unwrap, and you can see that tip kind of still stretched, but not bad. And if you wanted to, you could come out the other side, cut it, make it smaller, but it doesn't look bad, so I think we're okay with that. So yeah, we'll tab out. A lot of that too is on the inside of the mesh, so you're not going to see a lot of it. You're just going to see kind of like just the ring portion. So honestly, if you were really looking for saving some space, I'd probably cut it at the rings, and then when you bake it or when you're getting ready to save your texture, pull that off the texture map. like literally just off to the side. You can actually put stuff where it's not on the map. It actually won't bake out. So yeah, it's a way for you to save space. And then we're going to do the same thing for this ring here. So isolate, / and then tab into edit mode. Press Alt and click a middle segment. Right click, mark a seam, and then Alt, and then Shift Alt, and we'll just build this selection here. Mark seam, Alt, Shift Alt, right click, mark seam, A, U, unwrap, and not bad. All right, so we'll take it. Tab out, / All right, now we're coming up to the difficult parts. I think the handle is going to be the hardest part, but let's try the fuse. We'll save the hardest for last. Let's go UV, / isolate, tab, press A to select all, U, smart UV project, and that does a very good job actually. So you would definitely probably be okay just going with that. Yeah, I mean that is probably better than I'm going to be able to do it, but I will show you how I would do it. So I would, on this one, I would probably select sharp edges, and then I would mark seam, select all, U, unwrap. You can see that looks pretty awful. Part of it is it cut the circle, but it didn't do the inside cut, so it's still not unwrapping correctly. That's why you got that weird line, I suspect. So we can mark seam there, select all, UV, unwrap. That was right, we got a little bit better. Looking at the back, you can see, so the way I'm thinking of it, and I don't know, I don't know if it was just me, but as a kid, they used to have us do these tests, and then some of the tests, it would show you like a piece of paper and it would fold it a few times, and you'd have to be able to answer a multiple choice question on how the shape would end up. I failed those every time, so I don't have whatever part of the brain is that does that. I don't do well, so I have trouble with UV unwrapping, but the way I try to, or at least the way that helps me imagine it, is I'm basically trying to cut out each of these sections by themselves. And the more you can do that, I guess the better off the unwrap will go for you. Well, the less stretching you'll get. It's not always good to do that because then you take up more texture space too. But you can also layer stuff on top of it. So depending if it's appropriate, you know, there are tricks you can do to get around it. But I think this should connect and make a seam. So I would do that. Select all, unwrap, a little bit better. Looks like the front's messed up. So I think it's this part. Which that makes sense because I don't have anything going across. So if I was to do it, I would probably select this guy, Control, and click this line. It'll build a selection up. And then I'm actually going to Control click. I can just mark the seam there. And I am going to build that all the way over here. So Control clicking, building my selection, cutting a seam out there. Select all with A, press U, unwrap, and give a once over. It's got some weird stuff there. What the heck is... Maybe one other thing I might do is go to Vertex Select, and then just press A, press M to merge by distance, remove one vertex. Okay, yeah, I guess there was something weird. What was my distance? Okay. Oh, I left it in Imperial. Let me go ahead and flip that back. Units. I'm going to metric. There we go. A lot of the math works out better with metric. For some reason. Well, I know why, but this the if you're part of the United States, you know, you don't know metric. That's just the way it is. And if you're part of Canada, I think you guys have to deal with metric and imperial, so that's always fun. Okay, so let's do back to line segment. I'm actually going to try another unwrap because I don't know if that messes. Yeah, I think it does. Okay, so yeah, if we do merge, make sure to do another unwrap. The other thing I might do is you got some weird stuff going on there. I'm going to try to separate that out with a cut on the corners. I'm going to do these corner cuts here. Because if you notice, I got this weird little empty space, and I don't, when I do the pack islands, it's going to not put anything inside. At least it usually doesn't. So I would avoid having that open space if you can, because it's just not going to get utilized. The other thing I would do is I would probably make a cut there. I'd make a cut there. I would do cuts across here, and there, and there. So I'd mark that as a seam, select all, U, unwrap. I think that'll look a lot better. And then if I were to look at the bottom, you can kind of see what I'm going for. Basically cut out the side, cut out the bottom, you know, cut out the top. If I was working on this manually, that would be the strategy I would use. But this looks pretty good, so I'm actually happy with that. So we can tab out, come out of isolation mode, /, and then our last piece, I believe. Yeah, I think that's our last piece. The handle. And this is definitely gonna be the hardest one. So anytime you have these weird shapes, it's not a good time. With the drop down, let's add our UV texture on there, and you can already see our UV map is just totally hosed. Yeah, let's see how the UV project does. So let's smart UV project. It does a pretty good job. Yeah. Now a lot of it, this like zigzag stuff, that'll cause issues because it reduces your texture space when you pack the island. So that's the only part that's bad about it. There's minor stretching though, so it actually did pretty good. But if I was to do it, let's try select, well, whoops. Select sharp edges. I'm gonna mark seams right there. Select all, U, unwrap. All right, and then I gotta, basically you see how this piece and this top piece are at a slighted angle. So I need to separate those. The way I'm gonna do that is I'm gonna try an alt select, maybe alt select here. Hey, that one actually does work. So let's try marking a seam there. You unwrap, not too bad. All right, yeah, not looking too bad. We just need to cut some of these other pieces up a bit. And I can tell you it's probably this, all these long bits here. So if I was to do it, maybe alt select that one. Shift alt that, so maybe just cut it up there. So let's mark a seam, see how it looks. Press A, U, unwrap. I think that's better, I can't really tell. But we'll continue cutting. So alt, and this is like me in panic mode, so I just start right click cutting things. And then hoping for the best here. What is that? That down here. So let's try alt. And then we'll do shift because it missed these two pieces here. Mark a seam, A, U, unwrap. Hey, that's looking a lot better. So a lot of these parts can be packed and we're freeing up. So you know it's a two-part strategy. You're trying to get everything dark blue, so less stretching, and then you're trying to get everything as compact and small as possible on the texture space. You know, obviously there's like some stuff you just can't get around. I'm trying to see what like these two pieces are. Like that. Actually, there's something we can do. We forgot we need to make a cut into here because this is a different color. So did we do that on the high poly? Maybe we did. I'll have to take another look. So we'll control R, and then I'm actually just going to right click to snap it in place, and then I'm going to scale it and the Z to 0 to make it dead even. And then since it's already selected, I'm gonna add a seam, select all, U to unwrap, and then bam. That way we don't have that long piece and we're able to pack it a little bit more. And it did blow up because it's able to take more use, but when we do pack islands, you'll see kind of what I was talking about earlier. But yeah, so let's tab out. And the other part too is when you look at it, if you remember before, it actually, you know, it only had like one color on it. So now it's, you can see it's pretty good. There's not a lot of stretching. You definitely have a lot of cuts. Like there's a weird cut there, so that's might add some funkiness. So you do have to be careful where you do your cuts. And you can tell a lot of it in this view, but most of it will come like when you look at Marmoset, or if you're actually baking in Blender, like when you start adding your colors, if stuff looks really weird, it's likely because your unwrap is bad. Which isn't, you know, just go back and do the unwrap again. It's not a big deal. Yeah. Okay, so we got that done. So now let me show you what I was talking about before. What we want to do is simply select everything. Yeah. And then tab. And now you can see what I was talking about. I'm going to press A to make sure everything's selected, because when you tab in, it doesn't select everything for some reason. So make sure you press A in the edit mode. And then it selects it here. And one other thing too, which I really should have brought at the beginning of this. If you guys were confused on how I was selecting things back and forth, like if I select something over here and it selects it over there, that's this button right here. The UV sync selection. So that will allow you to dynamically work in both spaces and it'll automatically select on the other space. If you hate it, you can turn it off, but I actually prefer working with it. So that's what was allowing me to do a lot of that. And yeah, I don't think there was anything else there. Okay, but yeah, so you can see if we were to leave this the way it is, a lot of the textures overlap with each other, which you can do. It's actually a trick you can do to save some space, but you'd want to overlap things that are going to be the same color. And I can tell you a lot of this is not going to be the same color. So the quick and easy way to do it is you can just go to UV and do pack islands and give it a very small threshold. I usually do like 0.005 to 0.001. So 0.001. And I'm doing a really low threshold because Marmoset pretty much does all the texturing for me. If I was physically painting, which you can do in Blender, then I would give myself a bigger threshold so I don't overlap things on accident. But now you can see, like where I was talking before, if you have really weird shapes, it can cause issues where it's just taking up, you know, extra space. Like we have a little bit of empty spot here, so Blender is not going to be able to know to put like something in there. So you might scale something down, put it in, or overlap it. Like a lot of this stuff can probably be overlapped. But if you're just looking for something like quick and dirty, you can just pack the islands, you're good to go. But the more texture space you have, the higher fidelity or the higher detail you're going to be able to achieve. So, you know, taking the time to work on your UV unwrap is worth it for if you're going for really realistic models. But just we're doing demonstration purposes, so I just kind of wanted to show you guys this process, so you can take it into your own projects, basically. But yeah, so that's pretty much it. You don't need to worry about saving the image or anything. I would save your project though, so do that. When we export the FBX, the unwrap data, so not the texture, but the unwrap data will actually be a part of the FBX. So when Marmoset imports it, it'll see this unwrap. It won't see the texture, but that's okay because Marmoset's going to make its own texture anyways. If you were working specifically in Blender, you'd want to go to image, save your image as an actual texture, and actually bake that out. So, but we're doing the baking in another tool, so that's why it doesn't matter. And then yeah, one thing I wanted to check. I will hide my low poly, bring back my high poly, and did I remember to add a line in here? Yes, I think I did. I did. Okay, perfect. Yeah, that's how we got the color, of course. What was I thinking? All right, anyways. So now what we want to do, we want to make sure our high poly and our low poly are visible, like so. Make sure you file, save. We're going to select everything. Remember, all our scale's been applied. We have our high poly color ID tagged. We have our low poly unwrapped. So we are ready to export. I think we are done with Blender. So with everything selected, you can go to File, Export, FBX. I'll bring it over so you guys can see. And then what you want to do is you want to make sure selected objects is checked. You want to make sure that you are X forward and Z up. These are only relevant if you are working in Unreal Engine. If it's Unity, I forget what it is, but it is something else. So this is mainly, these settings are for whatever tool you're going to be working or putting this object in, basically. You can check the apply transforms. If you forgot, it should do it automatically. Under armature, if you are ever doing a character with an armature or doing animations, make sure you uncheck add leaf bones. It is not relevant for us, but in case you're doing a character model, that is something to consider. And then for Unreal, if you're also doing like another character model and you weren't doing a lot of the texturing or anything, you'd set this to face only. But Marmoset's going to take care of this for us, so we'll leave it at normal, so I'm not too worried about it. And then I'm going to call this Flashbang Blender Final. And then we'll hit export. And then that's it. We are done. So we're done with the Blender portion. So the next video, I'll take you into Marmoset. We'll color the thing. And then in the final video, I'll take you into Unreal. We'll import it. We'll create it or set it up. And then I'll actually show you what it looks like in Game Engine. So, all right, good people. We've pretty much completed it there. So after we've brought it into Unreal Engine, I'll kind of show you like some of the, like you may notice like because we modeled this as separate pieces, we're gonna have to build it in Engine too. So that's like another thing to consider. So you could, well, I guess you can't because we're doing it in Marmoset, but if before we export, you could join the pieces together and then basically color it as one unit in Marmoset. I prefer to work as separate pieces and build it in Unreal Engine later because it gives me more flexibility, not only on the coloring and shading part, but also like if I were to do like if it was like like this is literally an exploding flashbang, so I could separate or create physics on the actual components and blow it apart when it's separate pieces versus if it was like one physical piece. So there are advantages and disadvantages to doing it each way, but yeah. As always, thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.